How you doing, guys? Big Mac Dan School here today, back with another video for you, and today I want to talk to you about the most boring army in Warhammer 40,000. Necrons. Hold on, before you go getting excited, what do I really mean by the most boring army in Warhammer 40,000? Well, I don't actually necessarily 100% believe that Necrons are the most boring army in Warhammer 40,000, but over the years I've had a love-hate relationship with them, and for people like Thoughty K I, Necrons and more, Nick for short, and Josh over at the Pickle Jar, Necrons are a very exciting army. But for me, when I came back into the hobby after being out of it for a few years, I couldn't get behind Necrons. I couldn't get behind the idea of them. I didn't like most of the models, or when I say most of the models, what I mean is specific models that you see a lot of in Necron forces. So my enthusiasm for Necrons dropped right down to probably the lowest it's ever been, until the recent updates we've had of Necron miniatures and of the Necron rules and so on and so forth. So I thought this video would be a good chance for me to explore the journey I've gone on through the various stages of my hobby life in my relationship with the Necrons. For the next part, my audio didn't record, and I only realised as I came to edit this video, so what I've got to do now is try and remember exactly what I said for that part. I can't remember, it doesn't matter, you don't know either. So, roughly what I said is, the Necrons were first on the scene in 1998. I think it was issue 216 of White Dwarf. Late 1997. December 97, January 98 sort of period when they first appeared. So yeah, issue 216 of White Dwarf, we got rules for Necron Raiders, they were called at the time. They weren't Necron Warriors, but that was the first iteration essentially of what then became Necron Warriors. You got a box of 5 or 6 miniatures, I can't remember exactly, and you got a couple of scarabs in there as well. Now the scarabs were just like single loose miniatures at the time with no base or anything like that, and I think they acted slightly differently to how they do now in the game. The Necron Raiders came in around 3 or 4 poses, quite dynamic as well, considering, I say dynamic, what I mean is they felt like a good variety of poses. There was one sort of marching forward with his gun held forward, there was one with his gun sort of resting on his hip, and there was one with his gun across his body kind of a deal, which when I got back into the hobby in 2002, after being out of it for a good few years, basically they'd lost all of the variety of poses. So when I was 12, I have fond memories of playing when I was from the age of about probably 8 till about 10 on the Commodore 64, and there was a Terminator 2 Judgment Day game on the Commodore 64. You slotted your cartridge into the back of this keyboard, and you basically tried to outrun a truck, a semi as they say in the States, and you tried to outrun it on your little motocross bike type thing that John Connor rides in the movie, and I think you're riding down the LA River or something like that. Yeah, so I have fond memories of the film Terminator 2 Judgment Day, especially when I was younger. So with Terminator in mind, when these essentially T800s, I think, is that the right number? Tell me in the comments below if I'm wrong. Essentially these T800 models were released by Games Workshop. I was on board early on, and then with the lore surrounding them, the only lore that got released with them at the time, as far as I remember, was the Sisters of Battle had encountered this mysterious race of metal beings, and they'd engaged them in battle, and they were mysterious. They were raiders. They didn't know where they came from. They didn't know what their intentions were, other than they wanted to fight these Sisters of Battle that they encountered. So the whole mystery around the lore was, for me, quite enticing at the time, when really my imagination was probably not quite at its peak, but my imagination was, being a kid, it was quite active at the time. Fast forward to around 2002, when I almost got back into the hobby. I say almost because I went into Games Workshop after, at the time, I believe I was working at Tesco, and I saw White Dwarf on the shelf in Tesco, and it had The Hobbit on it. Not The Hobbit, sorry, Lord of the Rings on it. So it had Lord of the Rings on one cover, turn it round, the other cover had Warhammer 40,000 on, so I thought, oh, I'll pick that up. It's got Lord of the Rings on it. I'm into Lord of the Rings. I want to learn more about this Lord of the Rings game that Games Workshop are going to be doing. And I ended up buying the Lord of the Rings starter set, buying the Fellowship of the Ring set, and a few other bits. And then because I was going into Games Workshop again, I ended up picking a few things, but never really got pulled in by the Necrons again in the same way that I had when they were initially released. So with that, we have to leap forward from, say, 2005-ish maybe. We have to leap forward to 2012-ish when I got back into the hobby. And what were Necrons like then? Well, Necrons were these huge legions of dull miniatures, characterless miniatures, in my opinion. Now, that matches the lore, and I've said this about Stormcasts. In my opinion, Stormcasts should be essentially characterless. They should all wear masks. They should all wear the masks all the time, and just there should be something sinister about them, because I like the duality of something heroic but sinister. You get that with the Space Marine, and I think in the Age of Sigmar lore you get it a little bit with Stormcast Eternals as well. However, the heroes that Games Workshop present to you aren't presented like that. I'm going off on a tangent now, so let's get it back to Necrons. But whilst lore-wise it might be really cool, the idea of legions of warriors, thousands upon thousands, if not millions of Necron warriors marching across a planet to try and reclaim their tomb world, game-wise and model-wise, they have to aesthetically appeal to me, and that's something that the Necron warriors do not do. If I'm building an army that I'm going to be spending a lot of time assembling and painting, I don't want every single one of the miniatures to essentially look the same. Necron warriors all have the same features. This is the Necron warriors of 2012-ish. They all have the same features, they all have the same faces, they all have the same torsos, they all have the same legs, they all have the same arms, they all have the same weapons. So, realistically, unless there's some really dynamic posing, it's not going to draw me in. The whole reason I was drawn to the Eldar in the 90s is because they look different to everything else. Also, their aspect warriors, they were all painted differently. So the whole idea that I could paint one squad in greens, striking scorpions for example, one squad in bone colour armour, the howling banshees, and one squad in like reds and blacks, the warp spiders, it was fantastic. It gives you a lot more variety as a hobbyist to build and paint your miniatures. So these shiny gold warriors that are essentially just metal skeletons, they just held no appeal to me whatsoever when I got back into the hobby in a serious way in 2012. I was watching battle reports with them in, and you know, they seemed cool and everything, and some of their bigger units, the Triarch Stalker I think it is, the one on big spindlier legs, looks quite cool, and some of the Forge World stuff looks quite cool as well. However, the core of the army, the typical Necron army, is warriors, so I don't want to field about 10 squads of Necron warriors if I'm not going to enjoy building and painting them. Granted, you can build and paint a Necron warrior force really quickly probably, because it's quite a simple paint job. You just spray them metallic in whatever metallic colour you want, and then you'll wash them, and then you'll dry brush them, and then you'll pick out the various areas like the eyes and certain areas you might want to put a colour on, splash a colour here and there, and then you'll base them. And then essentially that's done. And you can be quite rough and ready with them theoretically. However, that kind of batch painting on a mass scale doesn't really hold much appeal to me until now. Now that I'm doing my Hobby 365 challenge and I'm trying to paint 365 miniatures in a year, the idea of batch painting 10 miniatures in one go, you can just see the Necrons I'm working on out of shot there. But the idea of batch painting those and getting them done in a couple of hours, it's fantastic. It appeals to me so much. Also, The new Necron sculpts are so much better than the old ones. They've got jaws hanging off, they've got gouges out of the head, they've got the skeleton revealed beneath their metallic skin, they've got wires hanging from the guts, they've got wires hanging from the cheeks, and so on and so forth. The whole idea that every time they reanimate, they lose something of themselves and they don't quite reanimate in the same way each time, that really appeals to me. It shows a little bit of development in even the lowliest Necron warrior. And it adds that little bit of a character-like twist that I crave in armies. More recently, I've been playing games of Kill Team rather than Warhammer 40,000. When 8th edition launched, I played 3 games. Whilst I enjoyed my games of Warhammer 40,000, because whenever I play, I travel to play, I found it a bit of a hassle to take down a complete orc army to play with my friends. So when Kill Team was released, the whole idea that I could take 2 or 3 kill teams down and have options to choose. Maybe I'd play Space Marines first, then I'd play Orcs, then I'd play Eldar, something like that. That game really appealed to me. And that game requires character, requires conversions maybe and stuff like that. And granted, I could have converted the old Necron warriors, but these Necron warriors come with such character, in my opinion, that they just make it easier. They make it like a choice that you don't even have to make. The choice is made for you, essentially. And let's not forget, the Necrons are in the starter set for 40k. Each of the starter sets at the various levels. So you had Indomitus when the game first launched in 9th edition. And then you had the Command Edition, the Elite Edition, and the Beginner Edition, I think it is. I'm not sure what the lowliest edition is called, the cheapest edition. But yeah, because the Necrons are in that starter set, I'm going to want them Space Marine models anyway. So I get some Necrons and I get to build and paint them myself as well. I still don't know a lot about Necron lore. When I got back into the hobby in 2012-ish, like I said, the Orc aesthetic completely changed from the 90s, and that was what drew me into the Orcs. As I bought the Orc Codex, I'd learn more about the lore each time. The Orc timeline from the time around the Beast Arises, going straight up to the Warhammer 40,000 universe, 41st millennium essentially. So I learned bits each time I bought a new codex, and also there's novels now with featuring orcs and so on and so forth. And I've learned more about orc lore than I have about probably any 40k faction. I know bits and bobs about various factions, Sisters of Battle, Space Marines. To be fair, Horus Heresy, I've read like 20 books of the Horus Heresy or something. But other than the 30k lore, in terms of 40k factions, I know more about orcs than any. Will I get into Necrons in the same way? Probably not. But I am now enthusiastic about Necrons, I can happily report, and I'm looking forward to building and painting this, my first official force of Necrons, especially my first force since I got back into the hobby. So that gets you up to speed with my plans for Necron miniatures and my changing of opinion in Necrons. I'm not going to have I don't envisage myself having a massive Necron force in the future, but just getting some paint on miniatures and then seeing how it goes, that's kind of how I'm going to approach the Necrons. I've got almost every faction in Warhammer 40,000, a small amount of almost every faction in Warhammer 40,000, so there's no telling where it could go. But my main force is still Orcs. I'm not just going to be playing Necrons on the channel. Well, when I play on the channel, I'm not just going to be playing Necrons on the channel. But it's another faction that I can get a kill team for, get them involved in a kill team game. My mate's lad has some Necron miniatures as well, so I can take them down to his. He can use them alongside his force if he needs a few extra miniatures in his force and stuff like that. And it's just keeping an open mind when it comes to the various factions in Warhammer 40,000, and keeping an open mind when it comes to the miniatures you'll be wanting to paint in the next year or so. I'll leave it there for now, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget, if you'd like to help support the channel, you can follow the links in the description below to my various social medias and also to my Patreon if you'd like to donate to the channel. I'll see you on the battlefield.